Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. Before we move to the formal agenda, there are a few procedural housekeeping issues to deal with. This meeting is being held under the virtual meetings regulations using Microsoft Teams. Decisions made by the committee will have the same standing and validity as if they'd been made at a physical meeting held at the Town Hall. We're streaming today's meeting live on the internet, and a recorded version will be available to view within 48 hours on the North Somerset Council website. I would refer councillors to the meeting etiquette, which you will have received in emails and already have from previous, and the guide to using Teams as previously circulated as well. Please remember to use your headphones or earphones, as this will improve the sound quality for everyone. And also, can you make sure that your audio is muted when you're not speaking, and that your, I said here the camera's turned off, but I'd rather, if you wouldn't mind, Audit Committee, if you can keep the camera turned on so people can see you're here. When you're speaking, and if you have the facility, can you please ensure your video is turned on? That's to other people that may be speaking. When you wish to speak, can you please indicate this by using the chat function rather than the hand signals? This is going to be easier for Hazel to monitor and be able to observe who's doing what. So please use the chat function to say that you want to speak. And something as quick as MIS, may I speak, would do. If you're leaving the meeting or returning to the meeting, would you please ensure that I'm aware of this using the chat function? This is important and nay, paramount in respect of any disclosable pecuniary interest where you're not permitted to participate in the agenda by law. You should immediately leave the meeting before the start of debate of an item that you have a disclosable pecuniary interest, and advise the Democratic Services Officer. Sorry about all these long words, folks. Voting. When proposing a motion, would you please indicate via the chat function you wish to speak? And if you're seconding a motion, please again clearly indicate you wish to speak via the chat function. The clerk will, in the meeting call each councillor in turn by name in alphabetical order. If you're voting, please be clear whether you're for or against the motion or abstaining. Before I move to the agenda, are there any questions from councillors? That sounds like a no. Please ensure all mobiles are turned off or muted. And for the benefit of those in the meeting and members of the press and public who may be watching via YouTube, we will undertake a roll call of all councillors to confirm attendance. The committee clerk will now undertake the roll call. I will then move on to the formal agenda after that. Can I invite you, the committee clerk, Hazel, to undertake the roll call, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So we have Councillor Cato.
Present.
Councillor Hearn.
Present.
Councillor Keating.
Present.
Councillor Pepperell. Not actually seen her join the meeting yet, Chairman.
So somebody must be having trouble connecting. So can I ask if one of the tech team can reach out to her, please?
And Councillor Tucker.
Present.
For officers, Chairman, we have Gail Turner-Radcliffe from Grant Thornton, the external auditors. We have Peter Can from Audit West, the internal auditors. We have Steve Ballard, Mike Riggle, Aisha Tinsley and Hazel Brinton from Corporate Services. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Hazel. Appreciate that. Thank you. So to the agenda then. Addresses by members of the public. Standing order 17. Are there any addresses by the members of the public?
No, Chairman, there's no addresses by members of the public.
Thank you very much for that. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence.
I haven't received any apologies for absence, Chairman.
There's an apology from Jeff Ring He was due to make it available, unfortunately he's unable to, so he sends his apologies.
Thank you, Peter.
And also apologies from Mel Watts. I believe she was due to attend.
Okay.
Yes, she was actually. Thank you, Steve.
And Gail, am I right? John Roberts sent his apologies?
Yes, I believe he sent an email through, so he's actually on annual leave at the moment.
Okay, thank you. So the next item is item 3, declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests. Are there any?
Doesn't look like there's any indication of any, Chairman.
No, that's fine, thank you. So let's move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of January 2021. And we're asked to approve it as a correct record. I'm going to go through those pages on the combined notes, they're pages 4 to 8, so I'm going to go to those now. And so on the first page of those minutes, is there anything that committee members want to comment on? That's a no then. Second page. All okay. Third page. No. Fourth page. No. And the fifth page. So in that case, can we approve them as a correct record? I propose that they are correct. Seconder, thirder, and yourself, Richard, you weren't there, so you can't comment, can you, technically?
That's what I was just going to say, but from what I read, it seems obviously all in order, but obviously go with the members that were present.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll approve them as a correct record. Thank you, Hazel.
Thank you, Chairman.
Any matters referred by council, the executive or other committees? And then none. So now we're on to the external audit update, and hand over to Gail for that, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. So this is one of the regular reports that you receive during the year. As part of the progress on page 4 of our report, which is page 12 of your packs, we list there the progress as at April 21. So we started initial planning for the 2021 audit in March. That is going to continue into April, and then we will email the audit plan to the audit committee due to the timings of committee meetings. So we'll circulate this via email and then bring it to you for your next audit committee meeting. Over the next page, so page 5 of the report, we also confirm that we have finished the certification of the housing benefit subsidy claim, and this was signed on the 30th of March. In there, we also mentioned that we undertook workshops earlier in the year, and officers attended those.
Okay.
Over on page 6, we have some audit deliverable dates for you. So we will get the 2021 plan out to you in April. The audit findings report, the auditor's report, and the auditor's annual report will be coming later in the year once we have concluded our work on the audit.
Okay, when you say plan date is April, we're pretty much at the end of April now.
So the intention is we will get this round to you next week.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over on page 7, so page 15 of your packs,
Yes.
what we've tried to do is we've tried to incorporate some of these slides, so forgive me because you will see these as duplicates because these will be part of the audit plan that comes to you, but we thought we'd just put some in here for you at the moment. So this is this slide is around materiality, so you can see that the planning materiality for the 2021 audit is 7.27 million, which is just a little bit of an increase on prior year materiality.
Yeah.
And significant risks, there are 2 presumed significant risks under the ISAs, which hasn't changed since the prior year. So these are revenue recognition may be misstated due to improper recognition of revenue and the risk of management override of controls.
Do you have any sense of what level of risk that is?
So these are presumed risks, so they will be present in all audited bodies. What we would say is the first one, we would intend to rebut this risk due to the nature of the revenue of the council.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is where we look at so the management override of controls. Typically, this is where we do our work over journals. So in prior years, we would have undertaken a sample of journals and tested those journals. Our approach to selecting those journals has changed this year, but the approach will still be the same. We will still risk score the journals, and those which we determine then to be the riskier journals is the ones we will investigate further.
My apologies, that's me getting a message from Marcia Pepperell. Could somebody please, technical team, please reach out to Marcia?
Chairman, I've just resent Councillor Pepperell the link to join the meeting, so hopefully she should have that now.
Thank you very much. Right, now I've got that done. Oh, sorry. I'm now going to mute my phone because I was expecting that she might do that. Right, my phone is now muted.
So at the bottom of page 7, then we list out some what we're calling other expected areas of focus.
Mm-hmm.
So the first bullet point there is around estimates. So the standards have changed on estimates this year, and we are what we call raising the bar in terms of the level of work that we're expected to do. So in previous years, we've looked at property, plant and equipment and pension being 2 of the largest estimates that the council has, and we will continue to look at those, but we will also be looking at how management arrive at their estimates in other areas, so accruals, provisions, etc. And the second bullet point is around the accounting arrangements around the council's planned insourcing of the waste collection service.
Okay, and what sort of level of risk do you think there are there? Because those are specific.
So we're not saying it's a risk at the moment, we're saying it's an area of focus, so something that we just want to understand as part of the audit. So at this stage, it could be that it's discussions with officers and looking through the reports that have been issued so far. What we will have to consider is the level of whether it's material to the accounts and whether there'll be a need for group accounts. And we've had discussions with Steve Ballard and Melanie Watts already around these
the
arrangements.
Group accounts issues, yes, okay.
Yes. So we're not saying it's a risk at the moment, we're saying it's an area of focus because at this stage we don't know enough to say whether there's a risk or not.
And while we're talking about group accounts briefly, can I ask you, there's not only the New Waste Company, but there were a few other companies lying around which were dormant, but still on the books, and are they aligned in terms of group accounts? Do they have to be presented?
So what we ask Steve Ballard to do each year is to undertake an assessment as to whether, so group accounts will only be needed if the activity within those companies is considered material. So there's an assessment done each year to see whether there's been any movement since the prior year, and at each year and then we consider that.
And by material, we're talking here 7.27 million or whatever it was.
That's our materiality. The council may decide that it has its own level of materiality, and for whatever reason may decide to bring them in as group accounts. As I understand at this point in time, that's no, but that could be a council decision regardless of our level of materiality. So the council could decide at 2 million, for example.
So it could set a different level
for council purposes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. But that is something that we do look at during each audit. Over on page 8, then, there is just some information around the updated value for money arrangements. I believe we went through a lot of this on the paper on the last audit committee, but again, this is a slide that you will see come into the audit plan, and it just sets out the 3 pillars of that will underpin our work on value for money this year.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Over on page 9 then, so in the past the value for money work has had a binary. It's either been qualified or unqualified. What you will have this year is more of a commentary, and over on page 9 we set out the potential types of recommendations. So these are recommendations that we can issue. The seriousness decreases as you go further down that list. So statutory recommendations, you've got key recommendations, and then improvement recommendations. And these are then that we expect the council to respond to and work towards achieving. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying if statutory is most important, is that right?
That's correct. Most seriousness.
Most serious.
I would, yes. So, for example, some of the, if we had to issue a public interest report or anything, would come under the statutory recommendation. Improvement recommendations. Obviously, I can't say what the future will hold, but I'm predicting across the majority of councils in England there will be some improvement recommendations coming out of value for money work in 2021 audits, and then key recommendations a lower figure, and statutory recommendations I would hope a really low figure, if any at all. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and in terms of, really interesting, I think. In a conventional business, improvement recommendations would be received gratefully, but I'm not sure how that might be taken in this arena. Could you give me some insight on that? So
it's meant that the change of value for money has come about as part of the Redmond review, and it's meant to be that the piece of work is meant to be more forward looking and more working with the council. So I would hope that the improvement recommendations, first of all, they wouldn't be something that's just put into the report and not discussed with officers. So it's hoped that it's more working with officers and making sure that it's not wildly unrealistic that the council couldn't achieve. So it's working towards improvement for the council, if that makes sense. So I would hope they would be received in the manner in which they were written. Okay, and so they're likely to be things that you had already had conversations with officers about beforehand, and yes, been working with the officers to look at areas of improvement pretty much before that even becomes part of a published document. Is that right? Not necessarily so. It would be more the case of if what we had found wasn't, let me think of an example. So if there had been, if we had found that governance arrangements were not up to a considerable standard, then it could be that we issue recommendations around improvement of governance. So it's not so much around the council is planning a new service and it's in the early stages, so we would issue recommendations on how to progress that. It's more around the what's in place at the moment and improvements to be made towards if we found any weaknesses. So it's more around the weaknesses in arrangements that we then make recommendations for improvement.
Okay, yeah, I understand. Do any of the other councillors on the audit committee have any questions around that for clarity? Richard wants to say something. Carry on, Richard.
Sorry for being new to the committee, Chairman, and
please do.
I mentioned in the pre-meeting when I was reading the papers, I came across the term materiality, and I've obviously heard that this morning. I think I've got a guesstimation of what it means, but I wonder if I could have just a briefer sort of explanation. I guess it's in terms of estimates, in terms of actual figures, and sort of rounding up, rounding down. Am I on the right lines, or totally wrong with that?
So materiality comes in. So as auditors, we can't test everything 100%. So we have to say, we sample select, and therefore we can't say the accounts are 100% error free. So what we do is we bring in a level of materiality, which is it's determined based on a percentage of gross expenditure. Usually that's the usual benchmark. And what we do is we say, well, what would a user of the accounts consider to be a realistic, well, yeah, everything couldn't be correct. So what is a realistic amount? And I think I say up in page 7 of the report that we consider that to be 2% at the moment of the council's gross expenditure. So what that is if it was to be more than 2% of gross expenditure incorrect, that might mislead, or the user might not get the full picture. So we use the concept of materiality to say, if it's again on page 7, I say that if there's an error of we've set clearly trivial as 36,000 this year. So if there's an error under 36,000, we won't bring that to your attention. But anything between the 36,000 and the 7.27 million will be in the section of our audit report, which will be in discussion with the council. Could be unadjusted errors. So what we say is between those, the 36 and the 7.27 are unadjusted. The council may decide to adjust, and they're well within their right to adjust, in which case we have an adjusted section. If we were to find anything over the 7.27 million, then it could have an impact on our audit report if the council decided not to adjust. And then as part of the report that we prepare is called the audit report that we bring to the committee then agrees that those adjustments are acceptable to be adjusted or not adjusted. So that will come once we've concluded our audit then later in the year. Have I answered your question?
Thank you very much for that. That's I followed probably most of it, and I'll probably learn a bit more as I go on, I think, but I think I've got the gist. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Chairman, Steve Ballard has asked to speak now, please, if you could.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Steve, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to respond as well in terms of materiality. There is a section in the report I'm going to present about the concept of materiality. And I fully back up all that Gail said. I think what I'd just like to highlight is that members of the Audit Committee need to gain assurance that the accounts are, well, they actually certify that the accounts are true and fair. True and fair doesn't mean exactly right. It means materially right, and all of the accounts are made up of a series of estimates. And what we're essentially trying to get you to certify is that and give you sufficient assurance is that the accounts are materially correct within the limits that Gail has set and the council has set itself. So we're not saying they're exactly right. We're saying that they are true and fair. They give the overall picture of the council's financial position. So we'll come to that in the paper that I present as well. So feel free to ask any questions when we come to that.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Gail, carry on with yours.
So on page 10 of the report, which is page 18 in your pack, we have a slide there on audit fees. So it shows the audit fee for 18-19 and 19-20, but the fee for 2021, John needs to have a conversation with the Director of Finance to confirm the fees. So we will bring, as soon as we've discussed those, we'll bring those to your attention.
Okay, and I just noticed as well that the last year the actual fee increased by 24.7% by my calculation. Is it, I mean, without prejudging exactly how that conversation goes, are we thinking the same sort of thing?
I can't confirm the percentage increase. I will say that there will be an increase because, for example, the value for money work has changed this year, and I know some conversations have already been had around this. So there will be an increase. What I can't do at the moment is confirm how much that would be.
Thank you. Okay.
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 From page 19 of your packs onwards then is the sector update, which again includes some more information around the new approach to value for money. There's some more information around the accounting estimates. I wasn't going to go into too much detail around those pages, but I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any further questions.
So, members, do you have any questions?
If I can come in quickly, Chair.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of my overall question is around timings and sort of going back to the schedule you set out towards the beginning of this deck. Are you confident that those timings are achievable, given that we're still in a work from home environment and there's still some disruption to ways of working? And I know that derailed things a little bit last year. So is your view that timetable will be achievable this year, even if there's further disruption over the coming months?
So I think it is achievable. I think we learned a lot of lessons last year. We have a piece of software that allows file sharing, greater file sharing. Then it's easier to share files through this portal, and what that means is, I think with the lessons that we've learned last year, I know the team and from Steve's side has worked really hard and worked really hard last year to get us the information. I haven't got a crystal ball, so I can't say for sure. I guess we're in a position now where we still could have illnesses within the teams that throw us out. But as far as we're concerned, we did the audit remotely last year, and there shouldn't be any reasons that we can't achieve those deadlines, and unless, of course, something comes up during the audit that we'll need further time to look at. But we will keep you updated as we go along if that should be the case.
And I can see Marcia's hand. Your screen makes it very difficult to see, Marcia, and I'm sure also that your chat function is very difficult to use at the moment.
Oh, really sorry. I had terrible trouble this morning. The my computer completely denied knowledge of this meeting at all, and IT went answering their phone. But then Hazel, whether because I messaged you, I don't know, but Hazel Brinton phoned me and put it right and apologised.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Hazel.
So I don't know where we are on the agenda.
So, okay, well, we are with the external auditors papers, and we're currently on page 16 of those papers, more or less. We've just done a few pages actually, but we're around page 16.
Thank you.
Gail, can I ask you a question about you say on page 16, which I'm looking at, it says how can you help, and it talks about making requests and prompt responses and things. So what would kind of be the nature of the request, perhaps, or how timely would they be? How much advance notice would we get for that? How much time would we have to respond and to be able to help?
So what we've done is we've sent management a document called Informing the Risk Assessment, and that is a PowerPoint document which has quite a few questions in there. And what we've asked management to do is to complete that document and then to run it past yourselves to see if you're happy with the responses. And then we're asking if you could bring that to the next audit committee for us to show that you've agreed to those responses. So the how can you help section is around those that Informing the Risk Assessment document.
And would that be something that would go on throughout the year?
No, so this would just be part of the initial stages of the work, and then we'd repeat the process for the next audit. Okay,
and that would be channeled through people like Steve Ballard and Mel Watts, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any questions around that? No, okay. Moving on. So that covers all the questions I've had on that. Members, have you got any other questions at all on the external auditors report? I have a hand up from Richard. Councillor Tucker.
Thank you, Chair. I heard fees being mentioned, and I know from serving recently on the Avon Fire Authority Audit and Governance Committee that there is a general increase across the public sector for auditors' fees, and I gather is generally down to a demand and supply issue, and also down to margins in terms of getting people to undertake the detailed work that's involved in public sector organisations, councils particularly. I don't know if Gail had any comment on that, or whether you're sort of feel free to be able to sort of back that up, but that's what we were told up at Avon Fire Authority. That seems to be a widespread view.
So what happened was a number of years ago now, I guess, PSAA, which is the public sector appointments, set what they call the scale fee. So they set out the fee what was originally the contract price in effect. Since then, the sector has undergone quite a few regulatory challenges. The Financial Reporting Council, the FRC, have come in and have. I mentioned earlier that we did a lot of work around PPE, so the property, plant and equipment, and the pension liabilities earlier, and that is due to the FRC coming in, having a look at our work and saying that we need to do more. I'm sure, as Steve can probably attest to, over the number of years, the amount of work we've had to do in these areas is not simply to charge more fees. It's because the regulators have come in and have said we need to do more work around this area. Also, the change in accounting standards mean that, so one of the examples I said was about estimates. The standards have changed this year, so we'll have to do more work. And again, it's the change in standards, it's the change in the regulatory requirement since these contract prices were drawn up. Again, this year we've got the change in the new code come in for the value for money work. So traditionally what we've done under the old code is we've done a risk assessment, and we've focused in on the one or two risks that the councils across England have had. This year we have to do work under the 3 pillars and provide commentary across all 3 pillars. So it's a lot more work this year, which obviously then comes with more fees associated with that. So it's more the case of the regulatory challenge, and the work that we need to do has increased, is what is causing the fee increases.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
You're mute, John.
Thank you. It takes a while for it to unmute. There you are. So I think that's everything covered on that report there. So can I recommend that we note that report and get a seconder for that, please? Seconded. Everybody in agreement? Yeah, everybody in agreement. That's fine. Thank you. So let's move on now to the update on the annual accounts. I'm just going to turn to that page on a different screen. Presenting this is Steve Ballard. Steve, can I invite you to speak, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Firstly, can I just say my connection dropped out for a few minutes just a couple of minutes ago, so I'm hoping it won't drop out again while I'm in the middle of this presentation. If it does, maybe we could defer until I get back. But
certainly, and if it's any help, Steve, if you feel the need to turn your camera off to save on the bandwidth, please do feel free to do that. That's a good idea. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Right. Okay. So good morning, everybody. My name's Steve Ballard. I'm one of the accountants in corporate finance who leads on the preparation of the accounts, along with Mel Watts. The purpose of this report is to provide members with an update of the issues which impact on the annual accounts process for this year. Those of you who've been on the Audit Committee for a little while, hopefully this report will be fairly similar to what you've had in previous years. There's just a few tweaks along the way. So the recommendations of the report are that you note the developments in the SIPFA Code of Practice in preparing the accounts. Note that members are not proposing any significant changes to existing accounting policies this year. Note that the finance report, which is actually the accounts document, is going to be updated into a new template this year in order to comply with accessibility legislation. I'll talk a bit about the detail about why we have to do that and how we're planning to do it, which has been a bit more complicated than we hoped. Yeah, we'll talk about the concept of the accounts needing to provide a true and fair view of the council's financial position. Talk about the concept of materiality, and also just officers' assessment of materiality, and how that relates to the external auditor's assessment of materiality. And then we just want to highlight some initial areas where the council or officers have assessed that there are critical judgments to be made in preparing the accounts, and the major sources of uncertainty and estimations used to prepare the accounts. And this is very much in line with what the external auditors have asked us to look at, and I know they'll be concentrating on during their audit. So we just want to set out what we think are the areas that are subject to these judgments and uncertainties, and then subsequently we'll bring you further information to provide you with, to let you know how we think we provide you with sufficient assurance
to make a judgment yourselves about whether we've provided true and fair accounts or not. Okay, so to summarise the report, section 2 of the report sets out a reminder of the statutes behind the preparation of the accounts and the Audit Committee's role in completing them. So essentially, the Council needs to approve and publish draft accounts by a revised deadline this year of the 31st of July, and then the audited accounts need to be approved by the Audit Committee and the external audit opinion given by the end of November. So that's consistent with the last year's due to the COVID impact. Section 3 of the report highlights the developments in the SIPFA Code of Practice in preparing the accounts, and really there are very limited changes to the code this year. There are likely to be more changes next year. In response to the Redmond review, there is a potential that the code will undergo a fairly significant change, where one of the core statements, which is called the movement and reserve statements, may be potentially removed, and there may be a new summary statement of the Council's financial performance that might need to be prepared. But that is still all out for consultation. It hasn't, the next year's code hasn't been finalised yet, so we'll see what comes through for next year. But this year's code, essentially, there are very limited changes. And the idea being that from the Redmond review is to make the accounts more transparent to the users of the accounts, so that the key messages come across more clearly. Anybody who's actually read the existing set of council accounts will find them a little bit hard, bit of a hard read. But we'll obviously do our best to try and explain them and take you through them when they do arrive. We just wanted to highlight that there is significant work still continuing to be done, or needing to be done, on the implementation of a new accounting standard for next year, which is to do with IFRS 16 on leases. Unfortunately, the officer who was largely was due to be looking at that has been off with COVID on a long-term basis. That's really impacted on our capacity to look at that. So we may not be as far forward as we wanted to be on that. But again, that's the real impact of that change is on next year's accounts, and we just need to try and quantify the impact potentially for this year if we can.
So very sorry to hear that, and send our well wishes to them, please, from the Audit Committee.
Thank you. Yeah, we're talking about Mark Anderson, who has presented to the.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, he's back at work, but he is having a phased return essentially. So we obviously want to protect him.
Absolutely. So definitely, send our well wishes to him, please.
Thank you very much. I will do.
I have a question about item 11, though, on your report, if I may just ask.
Certainly.
That's the IFRS 16. Do we have any sense at the moment, about what the potential issues are here and the impact or risks or costs or whatever?
So this is where the council has existing leases where we are leasing either property or equipment and they are currently classified as operating leases, which don't appear on the council's balance sheet. Under the new standard, they would need to be potentially recognised. We'd have to recognise what's called a right of use asset in the balance sheet, and potentially also recognise a lease liability in the balance sheet. The the existing operating leases that we disclose in the accounts are probably not likely to be material, potentially, but the issue we need to do is to review items where we may not be paying a rent. There may be what's called peppercorn rents and so on, where we may not have assessed. We haven't really assessed the actual quantum of how material that impact is going to be, and that's one of the things that we would have been looking at. So the answer is we don't know for certain how material it is, but it is an area of focus, and we know that we have to document it, and we know that external audit certainly next year will be looking at it in detail. So if there were to be material assets and liabilities, that would potentially impact on future, for example, principal and interest charges, but it does impact going forward, but it won't impact on this year's accounts other than as a disclosure.
Okay, thank you for that. I know Sandra's wanting to speak.
Thank you. This is a silly question to some extent, and I apologise, but when you say next year as opposed to this year, because we have now just started a brand new financial year, is next year actually this current year? If you get my drift, because we're dealing with the financial year 2021, which we've just ended. Because are we dealing with what you're saying with this 22-23? I'm just trying to be clear on the years because of right. So have they delayed them again?
Yes, they have. So it doesn't affect the 2021 accounts. It affects the 2021-22 accounts. But we have just started the 2021-22 financial year, but we won't have to account for it until the end of next year.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, good question, Sandra.
Okay. So going on to paragraph 12 then, just to highlight that every year officers review the council's, we have a library of accounting policies which cover all the implementation of all the different accounting standards which apply to the council. And we only disclose in the accounts the material ones, and there are some non-material ones. So we've reviewed our accounting policies. There are no changes that we need to bring to your attention other than minor changes. We're likely to include an accounting policy around group accounting, only to say that it's not material, whereas in previous years we just haven't included it because it clearly wasn't material. So we just wanted to highlight that this new company has been assessed as not being material for this year's accounts. Going forward, it will be material, so we will then need to prepare group accounts in future years. Okay. So the next issue to talk about is the accessibility of the account statement. You may be aware that sorry, has Councillor Pepperell got a question? Beg your pardon.
Yes, it looks like.
I may be a bit ahead of myself because I'm my queries when we get to Appendix B on the accounts.
Okay, so
accounts update.
Should we deal with that when we get there, Marcia, if we may?
Yeah, sorry, got ahead. Thank you.
So that's fine. Just one little question, if I may, please, Steve, on your item 13. It's about good practice for us to, as the audit committee, to review the policies on an annual basis. Would that be through a briefing session to us first as well?
No, this is essentially it. So last year in this paper, there were a few more changes to the accounting policies. So in the appendix, I listed out all of the accounting policies,
all right.
and you noted them.
Yes,
this
indeed.
year, because there were so few changes, I decided not to include the whole library in the appendix again, just to highlight the fact there were very limited changes. So,
all right. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, so on to from paragraph 15 onwards. I'm not sure whether members are aware that there is new legislation requiring documents which are published on the council's website to be accessible to accessibility reading software. Our existing accounts template was a really complex Word document, and essentially these readers are not able to read the detail of the tables and the text within that document. And in fact, it's really hard to make a document accessible. So we've been having discussions with the council's graphics team and digital communication teams to work out how we can get the accounts document to be accessible, but at the same time being able to turn it around in a time scale that means that we can bring it to the audit committee and give it to the auditors in time for the statutory deadlines. And essentially we've reached a conclusion that we can't make the document accessible in the time between completing the accounts and presenting it to the audit committee. So what the compromise that we've reached is we are going to bring a non-accessible document to the audit committee. And then once it's been approved and audited, we're going to produce an accessible version of it with exactly the same content, but in a more accessible format. And that will be the version which is published on the council's website. So it's taking a pragmatic view just to make sure that we do get a document that is accessible into the public realm, but it won't be achievable in the short term when the accounts are first presented to the audit committee. I don't know if anybody's got any comment on that.
That sounds eminently sensible to me. I'm getting nods from the other councillors. Yeah, thank you for that, Steve.
Okay, thank you. So really, then we wanted to go on to the issues that Councillor Tucker talked about. The paper does then set out in Appendix A the background of the concepts of true and fair and materiality. So essentially, the chairman of the audit committee and the chief financial officer are responsible for certifying that the accounts are true and fair, a true and fair summary of the council's financial position when they certify the amended approved accounts. So that means that they are free from material error. It doesn't mean that they are exactly correct. It means that they are materially correct. And we've already talked about how the auditors assess materiality, and also officers assess materiality. To be honest, our assessment of materiality is very much based on what the auditors think is material. But we do go a little bit further in that we also look at areas we think that might be politically sensitive. So, for example, which aren't necessarily by value as material as value of a materiality of whatever it was, 7 million, there are some areas in disclosures in the accounts which we think might be politically sensitive, and therefore we want to make sure we get correct. So things like officers' remuneration, the salary bandings disclosures, exit packages, disclosure of members' allowances, and disclosures of related party transactions, which are where members and senior officers have transactions with parties that might that have business with the council. So we set a materiality which is slightly low. In those cases, we set a materiality that's lower than the auditor's materiality, just to make sure we capture everything, and then we make a decision as to whether we actually need to include those items in order to give the true and fair view. It is very much a matter of judgment, and we'll come on to judgment in a second. So finally, the appendices basically just set out in Appendix B and C what the areas that officers initially think are the areas which are subject to critical judgments in applying the council's accounting policies, and the major sources of estimation uncertainty that are going to exist in the accounts. And these are, you might call them risk areas where judgment is used to derive the figures which are included in the account. So they're very much in line with what the auditors, the external auditors have highlighted as their areas. So they're largely in relation to how we account for COVID grant funding, how we account for some schools which aren't owned by us, how we classify the council's commercial property. Is it investment property, or is it PP? Is it other fixed assets, if you want to call it that? But the big one this year has been whether we need to prepare group accounts for the new subsidiary, North Somerset Environment. So North Somerset Environment only started trading in the last week of March. So they have very limited transactions with us this year. It's more about whether we need to recognise any material items in their balance sheet or not, and we've concluded that they don't. But that's a judgment which we need to agree with the auditors. And then other areas of estimation uncertainty is largely valuations. So valuations of property, valuations of pension fund liabilities, valuations of investment property. But it also things like are debtors recoverable? Our assets still have the same remaining useful lives that we thought they had? I've just spotted a typo. Dad debt provisions on page 41. I apologise for that. And again, provisions for liabilities and accruals. So those are very much in line with what the auditors are expecting us to recognise, and I'm sure they'll be talking to us about them. And so what we've said in the paper is that we will bring papers to the Audit Committee, and we'll also talk in the workshops that we do with you around the accounts, and we will set out how we think we give you assurance that those estimates and judgments lead to materially correct accounts. So at the moment, we're just highlighting the areas that we think are affected. In future meetings, we'll discuss with you the level of assurance that you've got and how you get your assurance in order to be able to sign off the account.
And what sort of timescale would that be, please, Steve? When do you expect that to be happening? Well,
that will come with the workshop. Will be done once the draft accounts are prepared. So the initial target is the end of May, but it's likely to slip into June, if anything, to go by from last year's experience. And I think, to be fair though, I think there were slightly more complications this year than there were last year. So I I would estimate that we're going to be well into June before we get draft accounts. Once we've got draft accounts, then we will be holding a workshop with you to discuss them, and then we'll be coming to the audit committee to discuss those draft accounts.
All right.
And
So in our minds,
the audit will start.
In our minds, we should be penciling in into our brains, as it were, mid-June to the end of June to have a workshop and briefing with you. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And notice that Councillor Pepperell Marcy's hands up to speak.
Thank you. Appendix C. Appendix B, I had a query, but you covered that. Appendix C, I was interested to know a bit more about the measurement of financial instruments.
Okay, so we have a range of financial instruments which are largely investments, which are financial assets. So we have some medium-term ones which are invested in funds, and we also have a range of short-term investments which are mostly money market deposits. So generally speaking, if an asset is or liability is short-term, their fair value is more or less their face value, and they'll come back with just a bit of accrued interest on. There are some assets, like the longer-term assets, where we have to make more of a judgment as to what the fair value of those investments are. And similarly with our borrowing, we borrow largely from the Public Works Loans Board, and the fair value of that liability isn't necessarily just the outstanding principal and the accrued interest. You have to discount it for the future, the time value of money, essentially, because some of those are due to be repaid in 20, 30 years. So the judgment comes in, as we say here, as an estimate. So there is an estimation on largely the longer term financial assets and liabilities as to how much we discount those valuations from their outstanding principal values. Does that make sense?
So it's called an instrument. You can use it. Needs to be.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there. So financial instruments are essentially any asset or liability that can be exchanged for cash. So other than those that relate to statute. So, for example, a trade debtor is a financial asset, but a council tax debt isn't a financial asset because it relates to a statute. So all of the council's debtors, or most of the council's debtors, are financial instruments, apart from the ones that relate to grants or that relate to council tax and an NDR. And all the council's investments will be financial instruments. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so I think that's probably it. So I'd just like to have a quick word about setting out how we're going to help you provide scrutiny to the accounts. So we'll be providing the workshop once the draft accounts are prepared, and obviously we're prepared to receive questions and challenge and feedback on those draft accounts. And also we will be completing risk assessments for the external auditors, detailing how we give you the assurance that we do, and we will bring that to the audit committee once we've drafted and agreed that. So in conclusion, the report is asking the audit committee to note the developments in the CIPFA Code of Practice in preparing the accounts, to note that there are no significant changes to existing accounting policies, to note that the council's financial statements are going to be updated to a new template to comply with accessibility legislation. Just to note the requirement for the council's accounts to provide a true and fair view of the financial position and the concept of materiality and officers' initial assessment of materiality. And also just to note officers' initial assessment of the critical judgments and the major sources of estimation uncertainty in preparing the account. I'm happy to take any further questions if anybody would like to.
So thank you for that, Steve. Do members have any questions for Steve? I see Marcia's hand up.
Me again. We have moved on to the report to the Audit Committee, haven't we? Am I correct? The next paper from we were on the accounts update report. I think we're on the internal audit report now. We slid into that.
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not yet. We're not.
I'll keep quiet.
No, thank you. So, Steve, I do have a question for you, if I may, please. And it's on the paper, item 8, risk management. It says 29 as well. On that risk management, on the paper that you're presenting, I see the words, but is there any anything quantified or any kind of numbers around that risk?
Well, essentially, if we were to get a qualified audit opinion from the external auditors, that's a more reputational risk to the council than any financial impact. It would be unlikely. I mean, potentially it might stop some of the local authorities borrowing from us in the short term, but it's very unlikely it would actually have any significant financial impact. It is having a qualified audit opinion is just a reputational risk which we don't want to incur, essentially. We've got hopefully a fairly proud record of strong financial accounting and good quality accounts, which we don't want to interrupt.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you for that. So, members, can we go to the recommendations? If there are, Councillor Tucker Richard, would you like to speak?
It was only just a quick question, really, Chair. And I heard you mention peppercorn rents earlier, Steve, and I was just minded about, would one of those examples be Grove House, which is basically rented by Western Town Council and owned by the district? Would that be something that would come up in the under that section?
You're muted, Steve, I'm afraid.
Apologies, Chair. I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head whether Grove House is a peppercorn rent or whether it's charged at a commercial rent. It's potentially it would be one of the areas that we would be picked up, but it doesn't affect the commercial way that the other body would be charged. Essentially, it's just whether we would recognise a right of use asset in our accounts and a liability. So it would have no impact on the rent that we charge them or how they account for it. That's their business. It's purely how we account for it in our books. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, I think I'd like to thank you anyway, Steve, and Mel in her absence, for this report, which I think actually is very well presented and very clear. I have to say that I found it, very much a very much more readable and understandable document. And thank you. So to the recommendations, we're asked to note those items that Steve just read out. Can I take it that we note that? I propose we do. Yeah, everybody in agreement? Thank you very much. In that case, I'll consider it noted.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate it. And pass our thanks on to Mel as well for your combined report here. It's good.
Thank you, I'll do.
Thank you. So now we are down to the next item, which is the Audit and Assurance Annual Report, which will be with Pete Can. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Chair. So this is on page 42 of your combined report, just for reference. So the recommendation from this report is that the Audit Committee are asked to note the Internal Audit Annual Report for 2021 and the opinion on the internal control environment. So that's what we're asking you to do today. So the summary of the report is that this is the closing Internal Audit Annual Report for the financial year. That's the 2021. So for clarity, that is the period April 2020 through to the 31st of March 2021. And this basically provides a summary of our audit performance and key issues, as well as a formal opinion on the internal audit control framework. So the key item here for you to look at to begin with is on page 43, which is the colour performance dashboard. And I'll provide some commentary around this now. So the first chart is item 1, which is the audit plan completed. And as you can see, the performance dashboard shows that at the end of the financial year, 80% of the audit plan was completed. I'd like to remind the committee that the plan of work for 2021 was prepared prior to COVID-19. It was prepared through December through to March of the previous year. And so the impacts of that weren't fully understood, and therefore altered our work throughout the year as we've updated you. However, this is of course reflected in our on-planned work, and partly reflects why we're at 80% this year. There were further effects on the plan as well, which I'd just like to highlight quickly. One of them is around long-term sickness for a key member of staff. That was actually resolved in about July this year, I think it was, and that was through termination of employment due to ill health retirement. So that person couldn't carry on working with us, unfortunately. Similar to Steve mentioned around the effects of COVID in his team, we've also had a member of staff off sick with COVID, and they were hospitalised during the year. I'm pleased to say they've pretty much made a full recovery, and they're back at work now. But clearly, again, that had an effect on our overall performance. And it's also worth noting that remote working as well has caused a small amount of issues, really just in terms of systems, data and auditees. That was primarily towards the start of the year when it was brand new to everyone. Everyone was in a position where they were kind of forced to work from home with no preparation. Some teams were obviously very adept at that and ready for that, but for other teams it was completely brand new. So that did impair some of our ability to complete those audits efficiently due to those obstacles. Despite all of that, we're pleased with 80% performance that we've reported. I think we reported about 84% and 86% the years before. So on behalf of both Jeff and myself, we'd like to thank our staff for all the efforts that they provided during the past year, during a difficult year. By the way, please ask any questions as you go along, but otherwise I'll keep going through the report unless otherwise asked.
Thank you, Pete.
Has Councillor Pepperell got one?
Well, if you said as we go along, page 1 of this internal audit report, the last paragraph, the Audit Committee accepts limitations in coverage of inherent risks. That, I suppose, has to be a permanent sort of worry for us all. Then we come to organisational risk may change dynamically over a year. The use of the word organisational suggests that they could be reorganised if necessary. So, shouldn't we be able, as Audit Committee, with the help of officers, to keep on top of these risks and understand them fully at the time the risks are being taken?
When we talk about organisational risk, we're talking about risk to the organisation as a whole. So councillors will be informed of that through the various committees that take place throughout the year. So that's how those risks would be managed in that respect. Of anything of significance, we would of course highlight in our reports to you during the year, and also through the other conversations that we have throughout our updates throughout the year. But I think what we're really trying to say there is that that there will always be risks within any organisation, within anybody, that they are inherent, and that due to that, there are only a certain amount of resources that we have within the service. We can't obviously cover every single risk that was there. We work on a risk basis of the highest risks first. So that's just basically that paragraph is capturing, acknowledging that you'll never be able to review 100% of all of the risks within the organisation, with the amount of resources that are available.
And you'd moved on to the internal audit performance. I had some queries about the performance dashboard suggests we're working at only 80% as a committee. COVID's had some effect. It was not down on the previous year. So the 80% performance seems to and I then read on and I felt it makes the 100% in customer satisfaction feel undeserved.
Sorry, you did break up slightly there, but in terms of the customer satisfaction, that is reviewed over the number of audits we've done. So let's pick a scenario. If we only do a small amount of audits, that customer satisfaction is covered over that small amount of audits. We still managed to do a lot of our audits this year. So of the audits that we've completed, that customer satisfaction is still representative of the audits we've completed. So it's not complete. It's not representative of the fact we did 80% of the plan. It's based on the feedback from the audits that we have completed, if you like. I think it's worth noting, and Councillor Cato will hopefully agree here, we have talked about customer satisfaction in the past and the way that that's reported. I did provide some information back to the Audit Committee back in July around that. I think it was our best intentions to review our customer satisfaction performance this year, but clearly due to the challenges that none of us expected this year, that I think being honest, that kind of didn't quite get round to being completed as we'd hoped. I think, and I'm sure again Councillor Cato would hopefully agree, that's something we would like to pick back up again and hopefully address in terms of how we measure customer satisfaction in a way that that everyone is happy with.
Absolutely, Peter. I think that it's something that we would be keen to look at, because it is something that I think would be useful to improve on, if that would be all right with you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have got some new members now since we last talked about this as well. So what might be useful is for me to resend the information which I sent last year. And then Councillor Cato, we've talked about having those informal meetings, haven't we, on a regular basis? So we could potentially cover this in one of our informal meetings. And that
would be the most sensible thing to do, Peter. Certainly.
So that's for me to complete, which I'll do after the meeting.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. And Hazel, if you might just make a note that that's an action that we need to follow up on after the meeting, please.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. So in terms of the...
Carry on, Peter. Yes, carry on.
Yep. So in terms of the second one, which is the audits completed in the planned time, so 86% of the audit reviews were completed within their assigned days this year. The remaining 14% related to minor overruns, and again they were primarily linked to some of the challenges I've talked about, primarily regards to remote working and staff ability to be able to respond to that. I've made a note in the report there actually that again that productivity has increased towards the end of the year as staff adapted to remote working. I think that's a fair comment to say across the whole of the organisation there in terms of how staff are now working well and have adapted well to the challenges of remote working from a standing start in some cases. It's also worth reminding and also highlighting to some of the newer councillors that we do take a strategic and operational approach to across the partnership to the joint working. So we are a joint service between North Somerset Council and Bath and North Somerset Council. We also complete work with other colleagues such as Devon Audit Partnership as well. And we also complete audits across organisations such as WECA. So when we do that, that allows us to take a broader approach and a more wider approach in terms of our audit reviews, and we can speak to colleagues across those organisations as well and pick up information from them, pick up maybe any audit programmes they've already got in place, which we can quickly adapt rather than having to develop them from scratch. So all of those sorts of ideas really help us to be that little bit more efficient and help us to ensure that our audits are completed within the planned time. You will see some of those joint approaches when we come onto the audit plan for 21-22, which is the next part of the committee meeting. So I'll highlight those to you when we go through that. Looking at the next item, which is customer service. So I think again we just discussed that really. We do acknowledge that the score of 100% was based on limited feedback last year from the audits that we had completed, and again we just agreed that as an action that I will speak to you about that, and we will talk about that informally and look to see how we can improve that particular area. The fourth item is the implementation of recommendations, the fourth chart on there. And again, we're pleased to report that 100% of the critical or high-level recommendations were found to have been implemented when followed up. And we've also ensured that all other recommendations continue to be followed up within the timescales and dates that they're due to be implemented.
Pete, can I ask you a question there, please?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at that and I'm just wondering how many recommendations were there, and what was the nature of those recommendations? And curiously, was there a common theme of any sort? If you sort of generalised and said, well, this is a theme that's arising.
Yeah, so I think the best thing to do there would be to get you that detailed information. I haven't got that with me to date, to be honest with you, because there were, as you can appreciate, quite a lot of recommendations made throughout the year. I think again, and something again that we talked about in the past was that one of the items I'd like to do this year is to look at this particular area of implementation and follow-up recommendations and look to see how I can provide a clearer picture of that to you. So one of the ideas might be perhaps I can provide an appendices talking about the recommendations we've raised in the different areas when they've been followed up. For example, that will then allow us to map through any common areas, as you've just highlighted. We do that as a matter of course in a way, but I think in honesty that probably isn't reported as effectively as we could do to the audit committee. So again, I think that's something which which I could pick up and look to present in a better format to you. There wasn't anything significant across all areas, if you like, so there wasn't one kind of main recommendation or one particular area which could be applied to several different service areas throughout the year. So there isn't any particular kind of weakness which could be applied across to all of the council. So I can say that with certainty to you today, Councillor Cato.
I appreciate that, Pete. So we note that as another action point that we'll pick up with you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And Hazel, can I ask you also to make a note of that, please?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So on to item 5, which is the assurance level provided. Of the audits completed where an assurance rating had been given, all but one of them this year had an opinion of either satisfactory to excellent. So that's between what we call a level 3, which is satisfactory, through to a level 5, which we consider to be excellent. There were no internal audit reports issued where it's considered that the systems of internal control were poor, which again, just for reference, would be a level 1 in terms of our scoring. There was one audit report issued this year where it was considered that the overall systems of internal control were weak, and that was in respect to blue badges. I'm sure that for the members that were here, they will recall that was reported at length during the meeting in November, and we talked about that in quite a bit of detail then. For the newer members, I've included a commentary on that within the report, so you can see what was discussed during the meeting in November. But we have followed that up as indicated above, and actions are being taken in that area to improve the robustness of controls in that area. So I can again give you that assurance today. Moving on to item 6, which is in regards to investigations and also counter fraud areas.
Pete, so can I hold you just a second there, please? Members, do you have any other questions on the audit opinion assurance level provided? I have only one question, which you may be going to cover, but what do we need to do to improve? I mean, I'm seeing a lot of satisfactory, which in an organisation that I would think of as trying to strive to be excellent, then lots of satisfactories doesn't sound like excellent to me, and I'm just wondering what we can do to improve.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's quite a broad area, broad question, because we're looking across a lot of areas here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it is. If you look at the chart in item 5 to the right hand side, that does indicate that our average assurance level is around 3.11%. Is how we calculated it at. So I think it is fair to say that in terms of the work we do and the audits that we've covered, that satisfactory is the overall view that we've had across a number of them. I think. Whilst, of course, we would aspire to be excellent, I think we have to be realistic in terms of the challenges that were faced last year. I think we have to be realistic in terms of the resources across the council. So where in the past we may have, worked with a lot of resources and tried to deliver what we would probably consider a gold-plated service in many areas, I think we have to be realistic that that's not possible anymore. Just a bit of guidance for the committee. I would be concerned if that was in the red area. So clearly, whilst we would try and strive to be as best as we can as an organisation, I think the fact that we're not reporting a lot of weak or poor audit reports would be some source of comfort to the audit committee. So we would acknowledge that that controls are in place, that they're not failing, but that in some cases that they could be strengthened, and that is predominantly why you're looking at an overall sort of rating of satisfactory there. So the main message there really is that if that started to dip in between anything under sort of 3, looking into your 1s and your 2s, I mean 1s in particular, I would be really concerned and be worried about what the wider failings across the council were in terms of its systems and internal control. So
and I understand that, and so the that particular diagram doesn't identify the difference between 1s and 2s in the reds. And you're telling me that really that red is a 2 red rather than a 1 red.
Yeah, so what that diagram does, it gives our current average assurance level based on the work which was completed over the course of the year. So if you look, it also reflects on where we were last year. So last year we were at 3.29%. This year we were at 0.11%. So and I think we could probably attribute most of that down to the fact that COVID has obviously had a massive impact across the organisation. Controls have had to be developed or changed within the last minute. So we wouldn't expect that to be potentially any higher this year. So that's kind of where we are in that respect.
Okay, thank you for that, Pete. Thank you.
Councillor Tucker.
Councillor Tucker, you speak.
Yeah, thanks very much so far, Pete, and thank you, John. Yes, just on the back of your initial question, actually, Chairman, in terms of striving for excellence, I suppose, how much benchmarking work do we do in terms of comparisons with similar sized unitary authorities? I heard you mention that obviously we work in conjunction with Baines anyway, which would probably be our first initial comparator, but obviously, sorry if it's a bit of a naive question being a bit new, but I know we've done benchmarking for key performance indicators on previous committees, so I just wondered how that fed into auditing, really.
Yeah, so we do benchmarking, but particularly, as you've mentioned, across Baines, which is obviously example for comparison, also across, as I mentioned before, Devon Audit Partnership, also Bristol and South Gloss as well. We have reported that benchmarking in the past to the Audit Committee. And I think what we also do is we also regularly review the Audit Committee reports which are issued to those organisations as well, look to see whether or not there's anything that is drastically different or hopefully is more in line with where we are and the issues or areas of concern that we may have raised. Within that, there hasn't been anything of significance which has been wildly different to what we've done and what we've observed. I think to come back in terms of the overall view of satisfactory, I think if you look across all of those organisations, they will be reporting similar things. Particularly over the last year where it has been a challenge. I do think that it's fair to say we have been able to give limited assurance over the last year due to the issues around COVID. I think everyone is in that position. The issues, as I've mentioned before, around remote working, around new systems, processes and controls having to be put in place at really short notice has affected that. So I would be surprised if anyone's, again, outside of the areas that we already benchmark against, has reported anything better than really a satisfactory kind of area in that regard.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So a particular area of interest to members may be item 6, which is investigations that have been completed throughout the year. So in summary, we undertook 6 new investigations during the year, and that's shown on page 48 of the combined report there. Investigations 1, 2 and 3 were discussed with the Audit Committee back in November, and since then there have been 3 further investigations which I thought might be useful to give you a little bit of commentary around. So the first one I was going to mention, which is investigation 4, it has actually been completed. This investigation related to a complaint and stroke allegation that was received from an external source through our fraud reporting service on the internet website. We've got a report of fraud form on there, and it was referred to us through there. And this concerned the council officers' working practices. We began an investigation into that one alongside colleagues from HR. However, the allegation was later withdrawn by the complainants, and the matter was subsequently addressed internally through line management arrangements. We basically considered that on a risk basis of what the allegation was around. Unfortunately, I can't talk about that in detail today because it would probably give away a bit too much information. But we discussed that with HR and with the employee's line manager, and it was agreed that could be addressed internally through line management arrangements, and that's how that particular allegation was concluded. Investigation 5 is an interesting one. And this is one that we've reported in draft to audit management, and we're just in the position of finalising this report with them. And this concerned the payment made by the council to a nursing home, which the home are now disputing that they never actually received. And what basically happened was that they asked for, so we received an email from the home asking for a payment to be made, which they said was outstanding, and at the same time they asked for the details, the banking details to be changed at the same time. The email came from the home directly from the usual home, the usual email account which we deal with through the home. We checked it all, and it was a legitimate email. It wasn't, like a spur one or anything like that. It wasn't a fraudulent or hacked attempt. It did come from the home themselves, and also. Because they requested a change of bank details, that was picked up by the service area. They challenged that and said, "Well, can you provide some more information around that? Can you provide the details of the payments? Can you provide some receipts in regards to that payment and so forth?" And the home actually did provide and complete all of that information, which again, if you were a fraudster, it was the sort of information you just would not be able to provide. It was quite detailed information they provided. Nevertheless, we completed an internal audit investigation. We established that the council had done everything correctly as far as we're concerned, that there hadn't been any negligence on their parts. And that one has been completed, and it's now back to the home who are completing their own internal investigation to see whether or not they can understand what may or may not have happened at their end to allow that request for payments to be made. The next one is investigation 6. This one's currently ongoing, and we're currently working with another council, not one of our regular partners, I might add, in respect to the COVID-19 grant fraud. This investigation is live. It's actually quite new, and as such, the value and type of the suspected fraud cannot yet be disclosed publicly. Again, we wouldn't want to make the fraudsters aware that we were looking into this at this stage. However, we are working with Liberator to further identify the comprehensive details behind this particular fraud, how it occurred, what information was provided, and we will obviously report the outcome of this to you in due course. But this will also help inform some of the plan work that we've got for the next financial year, particularly around the grant funding post-payment assurance that we intend to complete. So what we're basically going to do is we're going to look at this, and we're going to look to see how this potential fraud may have occurred, and then use that to inform the work we do going forward to do some further sense checks to make sure that no one else has been able to obtain money fraudulently from the council in that respect. Any questions on those investigations? Section? Question
from Councillor Keating, Patrick.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Thanks for those updates. I think that's interesting to see the work going on. I think 6.6 or investigation 6 just I think highlights the conversation we've been having as a committee that the COVID grants should be an area of focus going forward. And I think that, this confirms that a risk exists around that area. So encourage us to continue that. And then investigation 5, whilst it seems that there's no error on the part of the council, I think there are lessons to be learned or potential changes to process there. So I wonder if there are any recommendations coming out of that we need to look to have implemented, or is sort of the onus all on the other party in that case?
Yeah, so I think that they're both good comments. So to deal with those in order, Councillor Keating. So in regards to investigation 6 around the COVID-19 grant fraud, you will see in the next section in the audit plan we've got a lot of planned work in there next year. You're absolutely right to highlight that as an area. That is an area which obviously we've talked about in the past alongside the committee. We talked about the balance of having to get the payments out quickly and the pressures that the council's been under to get this quickly, whilst also trying to provide a level of assurance as well. It would be naive to think that was the only fraud which would have been committed. Let's be open and honest. We've issued millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of grant payments. That of course would apply to every single council, I would say, throughout the country. This isn't something which is highlighted in North Somerset. I would like to say that does strengthen some of our partnerships arrangements we've got actually, that we're actually able to work alongside a partner in regards to this. Again, I'll be able to give you more details once this is complete. But it does reassure me that some of the partnership arrangements we've got in place have highlighted this as a potential area issue of fraud. So yes, I think you're absolutely right to highlight that, and hopefully you would agree that our plan next year reflects that level of risk in terms of the work that we're planning towards that. Level 5 again, investigation 5, beg your pardon. I would again agree with your comments. I would say that whilst the council weren't at fault, those processes could be strengthened. In this particular instance, I can give you a specific example. Whereas what we would do, for example, in our accounts payable team, is that if they were contacted and asked to change the bank details of the organisation, we have instructed them to ensure that they ring the company. That they don't use anything which has been provided on the information given to them by the so-called person asking for the change of bank details. We ask them to use a phone number they know they trust, to phone the actual company, to speak to the relevant person they need to speak to, and get full instruction from them that this is definitely a non-fraudulent, a non-bogus letter, non-bogus correspondence, if you like. We have actually issued that instruction across to all teams, not just accounts payable. So we've made that clear to anyone who makes payments throughout the council. I think that in this instance that may not have happened. So whilst it did make a good level of inquiries, and in fairness to them, they probably didn't go that final step where they probably should have rang the home in this case and said, we've had this through, is that all okay? They did ask challenging questions, but they didn't do that particular area. So we've immediately issued correspondence to the council in our newsletter, the knowledge, reminding them to do that. And we will continue to reinforce those messages throughout the year as well. So I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Keating, to observe that, and hopefully we'll begin to address that risk. Thank you. So on to item 7, unplanned work, and very much building on the conversations we just had there. As we anticipated and as we talked about throughout all of the year, our unplanned work was around almost predominantly around the emerging, as it was then, coronavirus pandemic. Members will remember, the ones that were here at the time will remember that we provided a separate paper to the Audit Committee back in July 2020. And obviously work continued in that area throughout the rest of the year. And as I've just responded to Councillor Keating, that work will indeed continue throughout 21-22 as well. There will be a very, very strong emphasis on that work. So the final item, just to quickly raise with you here, is the formal opinion on the internal control framework. And this again comes back to the questions which Councillor Pepperell had towards the start of the particular session. So as part of our statutory requirements, the Chief Audit Executive, which would be Jeff Ring in this instance, is required to give an opinion on the internal control framework. So in Jeff's absence, I'm providing this opinion on behalf of him today. In November 2020, we reported to the Audit Committee that the state of the internal control framework was basically satisfactory at that time, based on our audit opinions at that time. However, we did also highlight that our opinions were tempered by remote working. And we talked about some of the challenges we had around remote working and around not being able to observe what we call normal audit practices. So just little things like body language, being sat amongst the auditees within a team and hearing the conversations that go on. You know, there's lots of soft things that you can pick up when you're an auditor, which you can't. You know, it's very difficult to get those sorts of things through these kind of remote meetings, because you are literally, you might be there for a week based within the team, you overhear quite a lot that goes on, you can see a lot that goes on that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise pick up through a remote audit. So we thought it was important just to raise that and to highlight that during the year. So that issue combined with the level of unplanned work and obviously the subsequent necessary changes to the original schedule of planned work, which we reported to you in November, that brought into consideration to us whether a limited or qualified opinion should be issued as a result of the changing plan. So that was based on the fact that we weren't able to provide as much work that we were either A, hoping to, or B, the planned work that we'd originally outset to do at the start of the year. So what we did is we consulted the Institute of Internal Auditors guidance. So they're the main body that we look at in this regard. And their statement is that if the Audit Committee has agreed to the change plan, which in this case took place in November 2020 with the Audit Committee here, then there is no need for a limited opinion. The opinion will reflect the work as detailed and agreed at that position, as we did in November. So with that in mind and with that guidance being followed, it is the opinion of the Chief Audit Executive that, based on the plan work completed, the Council's internal control framework and systems to manage risk, we believe are reasonable. So that's where we are in terms of our overall opinion. That's really where I am in terms of what I wanted to highlight to you today. I would, again, as always, like to thank the Audit Committee for all the support and the guidance provided throughout the year through some of the challenging questions you've given. Again, a couple of really good points that you've raised today, which I've noted and I'll take away with me and commit to come back to you on, of course. And that concludes my report, and happy to take any more comments and questions.
Thank you very much for that, Pete. And yeah, I do have a few other questions. One is, first, the observation is that when you say you classify it as reasonable, there is no higher level than reasonable. Is that right, in terms of internal audit grading?
Well, we could offer a rating kind of, or grading, if you like, sort of higher than that. I think reasonable is kind of in line with what we talked about earlier in terms of satisfactory, in terms of the work we completed throughout the year. I think that given the level of unplanned work that we've had to complete this year, particularly in regards to the COVID-19 and the grant claims in particular, that has meant that as a result of that, we haven't been able to complete some of the wider work across the organisation that we originally intended to complete. So I think that we would struggle to give an opinion higher than reasonable in that respect within those constraints.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but we can take assurance from you that.
Yeah. Again, I would highlight what I said earlier in regards to the using the word satisfactory in terms of the overall audit opinions. If it was anything less than that, again, then there will be more questions to ask, and we'd be having more detailed conversations. We would, of course, update you on that throughout the year. We wouldn't just leave it to the end of the year and say, we're a bit concerned about it. These would be taking place for our regular conversations with you, and we would be addressing those as they arose. We wouldn't just leave it right till the end of the year to give you an opinion that you might otherwise find concerning in some regard.
Okay, thank you for that. And I have a few other questions, if I may.
Yep.
Where's it gone? So I'm going down now into the other documents. Were you going to handle them separately?
Into the audit plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to handle that separately. Yeah.
In that case, I'll wait until we get to that. Thank you very much.
So shall I move on to the audit plan? The Chair, the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, thank you.
There was a recommendation for you to note that particular item that I've just gone through, and hopefully that can be agreed and noted.
Certainly, absolutely, as far as I'm concerned. So I can propose that. I need a seconder, and yeah, thank you very much. Everybody agree? Thank you very much. Yes, we'll note that. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So obviously, yes, moving on to the next item now, which is the audit plan. So this is the audit plan for 21-22. So that will have commenced the 1st of April this year, 1st of April 2021, and will run through to the 30th of March 2022. Just for clarification there. So the audit committee the recommendation is that the audit committee approves the audit and assurance plan for 21-22. And just to provide a summary of the report, this outlines the audit and assurance plan for, as I say, for 21-22. This forms the main body of work that we undertake during the year. And I've also attached Appendix B, our Internal Audit Service Audit Charter. We provide that to you every year. There's no particular reason why I provided that other than we do that just to let you know what our role is within the organisation. It also helps new members just to see that where they join throughout the year as well. So that's always useful. So in regards to the plan this year, in terms of developing the plan, it's probably useful for me just to give you a brief overview again to the new members to talk about what we do in terms of developing this plan. So this process involves extensive consultation usually between December and March. So that in this particular instance, that would have been from December 2020 through to March 2021. And that consultation and process takes place with key stakeholders. So that includes some senior management across the organisation, the finance business partners across each of the directorates, directorate management teams or directorate leadership teams as they're now called, with our statutory officers group, and also yourselves as the audit committee. So again, for members that were here, I think this is about this probably the third item I think we talked about, whether it's formally or informally, around the audit plan for next year and getting guidance and inputs in towards formation of the plan. It's probably also again worth me noting that this plan this year was completed, as I say, throughout December to March. Towards the latter part of that, obviously, we were in the COVID-19 lockdown once again. We found ourselves in that lockdown once again. So because of that, it is our intention to follow a similar approach as we did last year in 2020-21. Whereas what we did there is we kept the plan that we had. So the plan that I'm presenting you today, we intend to keep that under constant review. We intend to make any adjustments and report those to you as we go throughout the year. And what we'll also do is that we will also take a view over the plan as a whole at the 6-month period, and if there's any significant changes, we'll discuss those with you, talk to those particular changes with you, and obviously get your agreement on what you think needs to be made to the plan. We're not anticipating as much change as there was last year. Clearly, no one knew what was going to happen last year in terms of COVID and how it developed. I'd like to think if you look at the picture nationally, we're in a much more settled position at the moment. So we hope. So I'd like to think that would result in a more settled plan this year with less changes. However, of course, it would be naive of me to say that that's how it's going to play out across the whole of the year. We just don't know. So as I say, we'll keep it under constant review. But I would hope that the plan doesn't require as much change as it did last year, because last year was just such a difficult year in terms of changes that needed to be made and priorities that needed to be realigned. So as I say, if necessary, what we'll do is we will review the plan at 6-month stage. We will then look to ensure that it's adequately prioritising resources the second half of the financial year to make sure that is all fully covered. And what we've also done this year in trying to smooth over this process and trying to prevent as many changes as we can to the intended plan of work is we've included a contingency resource as well, specifically for COVID-19, to try and ensure that there is that kind of level of flexibility should it be needed, rather than having to remove stuff from the plan as we were agreeing today. So the detailed plan is shown on page 57 of your combined papers. I didn't propose to go through it into too much detail because, as I said, we have talked about the content of that on 2 or 3 occasions already. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments in regards to the plan.
So, anybody with any questions? I've got a hand up from Councillor Pepperell, Marcia. You're muted at the moment, Marcia.
Right. First page of the audit assurance plan. We seem to have gone American with the word defence. where we've got one little diagram at the bottom or whatever, we've suddenly started spelling defence with an S, which I find really, really tough. I don't like American English. I don't know if that's changeable or if it's too far down the line.
No, I apologise. You're absolutely right. I will change that. I've obviously got the American spell check on my spell checker when I.
Yes, that's so easy.
Creeps into everything I notice now.
on the right-hand column on the same page, you've got the word complementary. Do we mean complementary? Complementary assurance service.
Which this is on page 54 of the combined reports.
Page 1, our role, introduction. In the right-hand column, what's had to come up on my screen, we've got use of reasonable assurance. We've got sort of little headings. And the fourth one is offering complementary assurance services. And I wonder if we mean complementary as against complimentary.
Or free.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll make those changes to the plan. I apologise for those.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
So, any other questions or observations? I can hear some plates being cracked around somewhere. I have just a couple of observations, if I may, Pete, and probably one question. Let me have a look. So the first thing is on page 60 of the combined report. I just noticed that you present the data there on scope of services differently than you did last year, and I wondered why the change.
I presented that this year. I thought it would be useful because this is a new graphic which has been produced by the graphics team. I think it was in part of the presented it as part of the council tax information to customers this year. I wasn't sure if the audit committee would have seen this one, but I thought it represented a really good overview of the of where the council spends its money, and provides a good chart there of the scope of services. So it was more for
so that's interesting. So just from my own personal point of view, I think this is a useful graphic and it helps a lot. But I also think the way you presented it last year was extraordinarily useful as well.
Okay.
If you think back to last year's one, it showed how much it was in the pound.
Yep, that's correct.
And that was a very, very useful way of looking at the information as well. And I'm thinking about anybody, in the public arena as well, being able to look at those in both those different ways. Would be most useful.
I don't know if our graphics team have presented that information for the current year, actually, because obviously that related to the previous financial year. I'm not sure if that information has been updated accordingly to reflect that. That's something I can speak to our graphics team about and see if they've got a current one. But what I'll do next year, perhaps if I look to include both graphics, if I look to if they have provided an up-to-date version of that.
It's a small point, but it is something that people might find it useful to see it in both those different ways.
Yeah, understood.
And then the other question I have, point of observation really, is on page 64 of the combined documents, which is the results of your reasonable assurance model risk assessment. I observed that it's identical to last year.
Yes.
And I wonder if you've got any comments to make around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite straightforward to answer that, really. There haven't been any significant changes of the work that we've observed during the year to give us any indication that those should change anyway. So you'll recall that when we talked around the reports which either had a level 1 or a level 2, there was only one area, which was in the blue badges, as we discussed. That was only a particular area of weakness. Equally, we didn't really see anything else throughout that we felt really needed to be changed. So you're right, that is reflective of the level of assurance that we provided the year before, and is a similar heat map to the year before.
Would we then expect any of these things ever to be in green?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So if we felt, for example, that the council's corporate governance arrangements were really super strong, for example, but then we would move that in there. I mean, obviously, with things like corporate governance, there's been quite a level of changes to offices over the past year. We've had the Section 151 it's been outgoing. We've now got a new Director of Corporate Services coming in, for example. So whereas you may have a weakness in one area, you may have a resultant strength in another area, which would then leave you as the same scoring there. If it had been that we had a really well established, senior management team, which had been in place for a number of years, then that area would probably look to increase. I think obviously there has been quite a bit of change in that particular area over the last few years, but it is strengthening as each year passes. It's more robust. So if that picture remains settled, then that, as an example, we would look to it would look towards going towards the green in that respect.
Thank you for that insight, Peter. Thank you.
Really, the usefulness of that map in particular, and not to want for us to take a negative view on it, is really where the areas go into red. Similar to how if we reported an area that was reported as weak or poor, that again we would be concerned. But again, just kind of reiterate what I said earlier. If we felt, and I'm just using this as an example, and I'm not saying by any means that this would is the case, but if we felt for some reason program and project management was not working very well, then we would obviously report that to you at the time. So in the past, I think we've looked at areas such as procurement and commissioning, and particularly the issues we've had around contract management. You'll recall that they've been included within our annual governance statements, and at that point they have been showing not quite as optimistic within the level of risk scoring chart that we've got there. So if you were to map back a couple of years, you'll probably see that contract management has moved through this scoring quite a bit. Again, what would be really important for me is for me and also for Jeff to keep you updated about these sorts of things throughout the year. So if we identified a particular concern in an area straight away, for me that I need to report that to the Audit Committee straight away so that they can be aware of it. You can ask any probing questions. You can say to us, do we need to redirect our resources in that area a bit more to provide some more assurance, or to get some more information in that area, and that's what we would do.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. And I have one final question, if I may, on page 65 of the report, the internal audit plan. I'm looking at that, and that certainly seems like a really good set of items to be looking at. And you've got indicative starts. I notice just a number of things that make me curious. Anyway, are there any indicative ends to any of those? How does that work?
So the intention is to be all completed within the financial year. That would be our intention. The time it takes to complete an audit depends on the depth and the level of the audit. I mean, we have different amounts of time for each different audit area. Some of them may be really quick. So if we did a really small piece of grant funding sign off that we had to do, that may only take us a day or two.
Apologies for that. It's my landline. I can't mute it. My partner, I hope, will answer that. If they don't, I'll just kill it. Okay, sorry about that.
So really, I think the main message is that we'd look to complete them as quickly as we could. What we usually do is when we do the audit brief for the area that we're looking at. So when we speak with management and talk to them about the scope of the review, obviously that also determines when the officer has availability or officers have availability to undertake the audit. We then work out with them a schedule at that point of when we look to complete the audit. So let's take, for example, an audit of let's say, transactional HR, which we're looking to start in Q1. It may be that we're looking to start that well, actually, I can tell you we're hoping to start that in May. Assuming that there's officer availability, we'd look to complete that as soon as we could. That would probably be looking at somewhere like July. So there would be a scope behind each of these indicative starts, which would talk about the expected length of time that we'd hope to complete that. The real purpose of putting an indicative start in there is so you can see when we're planning to complete audits throughout the year. That's the main purpose of why we've included that within the proposed audit review areas chart for you, just so you get a broad idea of when we're looking to complete those particular areas. So you might say to us at 6 month points, you know, you're hoping to complete this audit in, I don't know, in Q1. You know, you're reporting to us that it hasn't been completed or isn't been finished. You might say to me, can you tell me why that is, please? And I could then provide you a response as to why that was.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Because I think really that was the thing for me. The outstanding question is about the any more definition of scope and objective and plan behind each area. And you've kind of outlined that.
Yes.
And does that get published to the, say, the S151 on a regular basis, or to the chief executive, or
Yeah, so,
I mean, how do you manage that?
So what we do is we talk through, when we're completing audit plans, we talk through a broad idea of the potential area of scope we're going to look at with that particular service area. So, you know, whether it's the director in that area, we might say, look, we're looking to do an audit, I don't know, of green waste this year. What is the perspective you think we should look at? This is what we think we should look at. What do you think we should look at? We'll have a discussion around that at the time, and we'll agree a baseline scope, which you're right, we'll then get, you know, once completed all of them, that will be reported to our financial strategy board and also gets reported to the Section 151 officer as well in detail. This is just intended to give you a high level overview. What I would say is that there was a proposed scope at that time. You will never know for sure. So I could tell you right now what I think would be, you know, a good area to audit in a particular service area, but you know, things change very, very quickly sometimes. It might be that we've agreed that we're going to spend a particular, you know, period of audit work over you know, area. It might be that year or details change. So, you know, only if it's outlined at the start of the year, that will change throughout the year.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
But what I could do actually, just to be more helpful in that regard, sorry, Councillor Cato, is if you wanted to see that detailed list of scope, again, which we can talk through in one of our internal meetings.
That would very much appreciate, you know, better understanding as well. So definitely, I think that would be useful for us as an audit committee to have that level of understanding.
So why don't we make that the first thing that we discussed? Because obviously, because this plan is new and it is right now, then that's probably our first meeting. That's probably the best area to discuss, because that's something which is immediate and something that you'd like to understand, you know, with some immediacy, the kind of particular scope we're looking at within that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That was really good. So Hazel, can I ask you to make a note of that action as well, please?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So yes, that was the only question remaining on my point of view. I noticed a couple of hands went up. Are there any more questions anybody else would like to ask? Councillor Tucker, Peter, Richard?
Just very quickly, further to what you were saying there, Chairman, and your last answer, Pete, in terms of where you have initial discussions with the directors in terms of the focus of the audit. What do you hopefully this doesn't happen, but obviously there are occasions where it does, in terms of there might be some disagreement between what you feel are the areas that might need to be included and areas, and obviously they might have a different opinion. How do you do you have the trump card at the end of the day? Is it what you want, or I suppose you try and reach some sort of agreement, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, Councillor Tucker. I mean, fortunately, I'd like to say that we don't. That very rarely happens. I'm really pleased to say. You know, it's very much our role is to ensure that we're providing good value, and that we're actually auditing the areas which everyone is in agreement are the right areas to cover. Just to give the committee some assurance, though, if we wanted to audit a particular area, and the auditee or the director or whoever it might be that we're speaking to in regards to that proposed area disagreed, then we do still have the independent ability to go ahead and audit that area should we want to. Clearly, we would always like to ensure that the director are on board with that, because it just makes the review that so much more easy all the way through. But the section 151 will be copied into the scope of the audits as well, and obviously oversees the internal audit plan as well. So she, as it will now be come May, will always be able to be involved in the discussions as well. We are also able to report to statutory officers as well. Every couple of months we report to statutory officers. So again, any areas that we think that we're getting some challenge in, that we wouldn't, that we would like to look at, that we don't feel we're getting the particular buy-in or whatever it might be, we can talk to the chief executive, we can talk to the head of legal service and so forth. We can talk to a section 151 officer in that arena, and again get their views and so forth. It might be that there are really good reasons why we shouldn't audit a particular area, so we have to work with them and understand that actually, we may think it's a good area of focus, but there may be really good reasons why they think it's not a good area of focus. And as long as we record and report that, in respect of that, then that's absolutely fine. But yeah, if there ever was a situation where we really wanted to look at an area and we were kind of asked not to, if you like, then we do have that independent ability to still go ahead and audit that area, notwithstanding any comments that have been made to us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Pete. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. So unless there are any other questions for Peter, then I'd like to take up the recommendation that we approve the audit assurance plan for 21-22. I propose that we do that. Seconder. Thank you. Everybody in agreement? Yeah, I take that. Yes, brilliant. Thank you very much. In that case, we approve the audit assurance plan for 21-22. Thank you very much, Peter, for all your input and your explanations. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for your help. Thank you.
So now, looking for my next item, which is basically to close the meeting, I think. Urgent business permitted under Local Government Act. I don't think there's any other business. There being no further business, I declare the meeting closed. And the